Story 1. When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently, they had been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on the paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours and overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one morning, technically, at about 3 a.m. we woke up to ring notifications from our phones showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch pounding on our front door. We give it 2 to 3 minutes just watching him on the app thinking maybe he's drunk and has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out you fucking pussy, I'm gonna fuck you up," etc. And he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the police as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look/listen for any attempt of a home invasion. At this point, our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from theirs. We're thinking, okay, cool, they know something is up and they're trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and we explain the situation and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior, I had let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, I was trying to expose myself to his family because they could look down on our entire yard from where theirs sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and me inside of our own home doing totally normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous, not that it would have mattered anyway, we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle, so they had been filming us for no reason at all and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in and my wife was devastated, a huge breach of our privacy of course, and totally unfounded accusations as we had never done anything to anger these people, we hadn't even met them. The police told us just don't worry about it. If he tries something again, just give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in their driveway. Story 2. I lived in a 3-story apartment building on the middle floor. The bottom floor was basement apartments. It was a very quiet building and a lot of people were older and lived there 10 years or more. Then this weird creepy asshole moved in below us. He would play music loud all night and I had to be up for work at 5 a.m. He wouldn't answer the door so we could ask him to turn it down. So I had to jump up and down until he heard it. He had passed off girls banging on his door screaming for hours and he was home but wouldn't answer. She ran out and poured nail polish all over his car. His apartment was basement but he had a huge window that was right next to the stairs to get in. He never closed the curtains and you would see directly down into his living room where he had built a sex swing with bondage stuff hanging on it, and turned the air conditioning all the way up and left it after he switched the electric back into the landlord's name. He was a nightmare neighbor. Story 3. My family and I used to live in a rough neighborhood when I was a kid. One night, it was just my mom, my 2 siblings, and I at home, and my dad was gone on a business trip. Around midnight, someone started knocking on our door. My mom woke up, went to the front door, and asked who it was. No one answered. She thought that maybe it was some kids playing ding-dong ditch, so she went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, again, someone starts knocking. She gets up and peers through the side window to see if she can spot anyone out there, but nobody is there. She starts to worry, so she goes back to the room, grabs my dad's double barrel, and sits in the living room in the dark, waiting. Then, more knocking. My mom began shouting at whoever it was that she was going to call the cops and that if anyone tried to come in, she would shoot them. At about 2 a.m., the police finally showed up and did a quick search outside of our house while we waited inside. After their search, they told my mom that they had found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door and asked if it belonged to my mom. She said that it wasn't hers and asked why. The cop told her it belonged to whoever was knocking on the door. They were planning on strangling my mom with the barbed wire when she opened the door to see who was knocking. They said that she was very smart to not open the door to see who was there, otherwise it could have cost her life. The cops said that they'd patrol the neighborhood until morning and do a thorough investigation once there was daylight. That morning, as they were searching around the house, they found footprints leading around to the back of the house and up to my bedroom window. They had also found nicks in the window sill where the person was trying to pry it open to break in but failed. My mom always suspected it was this one neighbor because he would always stare at my mom through his curtains and wasn't very friendly. He also knew when my dad wasn't home, since he knows what vehicle he drives. We moved out of that house after that. Story 4. So when I was in high school, there were a few disturbing occurrences in my neighborhood. A woman down the street who lived alone woke up one night to go to the bathroom and heard her TV on in the living room. So she naturally wandered in there, assuming nothing out of the ordinary. She found a guy sitting on her couch, watching the TV. Started screaming, obviously terrified, and the guy ran out of her house. Maybe a week later, further down the street, there was a family with a young daughter. She woke up in the middle of the night with her bedsheets pulled down and a guy tickling her feet. Again, started screaming, and the guy fled. Another week or so later, 3 houses down where an elderly couple lived, the husband woke up in the middle of the night to find a man standing over his bed and staring at his wife sleeping. The old man started hollering at the guy, and the guy fled again. So now SH*T is on super high alert. Cops patrolling regularly, etc. They somehow figured out who it was, and everyone in the neighborhood got a flyer with his picture. Behind us was a densely wooded area that stretched for a couple of miles in every direction. This guy had been literally living in those woods for upwards of a month in a tent, doing God only knows what when he wasn't breaking into houses. But the creepiest part of the story is this. One night, in the middle of all these incidents, we had our sliding glass door open with just the screen door behind it shut. This was in the summer. We had a big backyard, and it was pitch black back there at night. Our dog suddenly jolted up and started growling viciously, like I'm talking, tail stiff as a board, hair on his neck standing up, etc. Our dog was the best, nicest dog, like, ever. He never did that. So naturally we were like, what the F***CK? My father jumped up and put the floodlight over the deck on to see what was back there, but there was nothing. The next morning, we were outside doing yard work and noticed the lock on our back gate was broken. Someone had clearly done it. It wasn't like it was wear and tear or something like that. It's very safe to assume that this guy had tried to get into our backyard/house, but was deterred by my dog's growling/barking. 15 out of 10, good boy. Story 5. My dad lives in an apartment, and one day he came home to cops outside of his door. It was very early, 5 or 5:30 a.m. They asked him if they could ask him some questions, and my dad said, of course, invited them in and made them breakfast. They asked him some questions about his neighbor across the hall. Just general stuff like, have you noticed anything weird, etc., and my dad told him no. He looks like a well-put-together 30-ish-year-old businessman. My dad lives in higher-end apartments, so this is what everyone looks like, nothing weird or out of the ordinary. The cops continue to go on and explain a 30-year-old woman is missing and was last seen by a security camera with this man walking into the building, but they never had any footage of her, or him for that matter, leaving the apartment. The cops stay outside and monitor the apartment until about 5 p.m. that night, when they finally get a warrant. They notice a shower curtain and golf clubs scattered on the bedroom floor. They end up arresting the guy for some child porn charges, which they found a ton on his computer. Fast forward 3 weeks, and the cops find her body about 45 minutes south in the woods on the side of a bike trail. Some runner stumbled upon her. Nothing more was released on what state she was in. About 2 months ago, this story started in 2014, they found more tapes as the investigators went back to look at them. They discovered the man leaving the apartment with his golf bag, but like I said earlier, all of his clubs were in his room. I'm sure many people have put 2 and 2 together, but a full-size woman wouldn't fit in a golf bag, but that's how he got her out. His trial is coming up. He was already tried for the child porn and got a bunch of time for that. As of right now, he claims it was a second accident and he panicked and tried to hide it as he had a girlfriend. Kind of another fucked up part about this is after he moved out, they turned his apartment into a model unit. Some guy wanted to live on the top floor so bad that he didn't care if someone was killed in there, and currently has lived in the apartment for 3 years. Story 6. I didn't really talk to him, but I'm pretty sure he murdered his wife and 2-year-old daughter. When I met the wife, I was maybe 10 or so. I went up to her because the dog was with her on a walk with her and her kid, and I have a soft spot for dogs. She was really sweet. The husband, however, was kinda sketchy. He had a very expensive car. I'm pretty sure he was a drug lord, but IDK, the only thing he would do was drive or wash his car. My friend, also a neighbor, and I were playing outside around mid-June, and he started to pull out of his driveway. My friend jokingly yelled out, "Why do you drive around so much?" He replied, "Because driving is the only thing to do in this piece of town." And he sped off, but not before flicking us off. A couple of months later, the police started knocking on the door. They asked to see an adult, so I went and got my mom, and they asked her if she knew anything about the neighbors. They said that he and the wife had supposedly gotten divorced and asked if we knew the whereabouts of his wife/kid. We said no, of course, and they told us that apparently the wife ran away and they couldn't track down the daughter. The only thing we knew about the wife is that she had a 2-year-old, was maybe pregnant, they had a baby shower at their house at some point, and that she drove a white Jeep. A couple of months later, Mr. Maybe murdered his wife and kids, was cleaning his car, and my mom and I were leaving for a chiropractor appointment. My mom noticed the white Jeep in the garage. If the wife had run off, then we would have taken the Jeep. The dude saw that my mom had noticed the Jeep, and a couple of days later he sold the white Jeep. At one point we had gotten a package for them delivered to our house for his house, so we went to return it. His house smelled like pot and death, and we saw a gun on the dining room table. We noped on out of there, and he later moved away. I really hope that it was a misunderstanding or something, and that the wife took the kid and ran as far as she could. Story 7. My time has come. So my aunt lives next door to us, which would be all fine and dandy, but she's a sociopath. The house we live in was hers and my father's growing up, and we, dad, mom, brother, me, moved in with my grandmother 10 years ago. My aunt would come get my nan's keys to fill her car with gas and copy the house key. My aunt would then come into our house in the wee hours of the morning and steal the stupidest shit. We didn't notice for a while, but then our new shampoo bottles would be empty suddenly, our paper towels and toilet paper would be gone, and our food, silverware, and cups would be gone. Then, my mom's jewelry would be on the stairs coming down from the bedrooms, like it was dropped on the way out. One morning, I was wide awake around 2:30 a.m. for some reason, and I heard what I assumed was one of my parents coming upstairs, going into their bedroom across the hall, and then a few minutes later going back downstairs. The dog's tail was wagging and hitting the floor, so I wasn't scared until the next morning when my parents asked if I was up late that night and came in their room. The thing was, she didn't sneak up or tiptoe or anything, straight up stomped up the stairs and down the hall. She had done this many times, and my dog was used to her coming and was the shittiest guard dog ever. We then changed the locks and put a special coated door for the staircase. Since she couldn't go upstairs to watch us sleep anymore, she would come around 5 to 6 in the morning, just before my mom and I got up for school. Our alarms would go off at 5:45 a.m. on the weekdays, and we would hear the front door slam shut, and if we ran to the windows we would see her going back to her house. We changed the locks again, and the night visits seemed to stop. I could go on with more fucked up shit she did to us, but this is long enough. So more on her. When I was about 10, it was close to Valentine's Day, and she told me this was the last holiday that she was going to give me candy because I was getting fat and the whole family was concerned for my health. Also, whenever we went on vacation we would have to lock up all of our valuables, purses, paintings, furniture, and when we got back, several knick-knacky things would be gone. One time a painting my grandfather gave my dad was gone, and we were really pissed about that. We knew she had been in the house because a family picture of my mom's would be on the floor or face down on the mantle. Eventually, my grandmother got Alzheimer's, and when my nan first went to the hospital, she gave my aunt her wedding rings, and those are long gone. Bitch never gave them back. Absolutely heartbreaking to explain over and over to my grandmother that her own daughter stole her wedding rings. When my aunt visited Nan, she would pilfer through all her drawers and steal anything and everything of value. One day I was helping my grandmother get dressed and she cried because she didn't have any more jewelry because my aunt stole it. Another morning, while my grandmother was quickly succumbing to Alzheimer's, my aunt came over at 5 a.m. to give her coffee, which we had already done. I'm super hammered right now, and I hope that made sense. Thanks for the brief internet fame, my most popular post so far. Since many of you asked about involving the cops, we never had enough proof. It could have been anybody coming into my house from a legal standpoint, but it wasn't, you know? Also, some more fucked up shit. When my grandmother did die, my aunt fought us for nearly 2 years over an old, rundown set of 7 apartments my parents had taken care of for the past 30 years. Finally settled with a huge check to her, and she's calmed down since because she can't swindle more money out of us. She now has a life-size cardboard cutout of Matt Damon in her window staring at us. I can't get a good picture of it or I would show it. Story 8. There was this old guy who lived with his wife and his dog a few doors away in a big house. He rarely left his home, and when he did, he only took his dog for a walk. He also talked very rarely and seemed to avoid other people, while his wife was somewhat more social. The couple lived on our street for a few years and everything appeared to be fine. However, someday they divorced and the lady moved away for reasons unknown. The old guy remained with the dog in his house, and a few years passed. There was never something suspicious, and, aside from his usual strange behavior, everything seemed pretty normal. One morning, that was approximately 7 years ago, I left as usual my house to catch the school bus. Our street is relatively quiet and normally there isn't much stuff going on. But this morning was a bit different. There were a few neighbors on the street and my parents said that there was something wrong with the old guy, which lived on the end of the street, but nothing specific was known. So I went to school and didn't think much about it. As I returned and exited the bus at the bus stop, I saw that the whole street was cordoned off and evaluated. Police cars and officers were everywhere, and even a SWAT team was there. I had no idea what was going on. I met up with my parents and they explained to me that the old guy tried to commit suicide and planned to take the whole street with him. He flooded his entire basement with gasoline and had an improvised bomb in his garden shed, which was essentially a big pile of propane gas tanks tied together. A timer clock and a toaster served as the fuse mechanism for both the bomb and the basement. The whole thing was rigged to explode between 7 to 8 a.m. in the morning. A smaller version of this explosive was placed in the trash bin of the guys who lived right next to this maniac. Obviously, it was something personal. Before the old man triggered the bomb, he wrecked the entire interior of his house with an axe and then went to the garage with his poor dog, locked the gate, and turned his car engine on. He put his dog in the trunk and seated himself in the driver's seat, waiting to die from asphyxiation before he would be blown to pieces. Luckily, the plan didn't work out because a neighbor heard the car engine and became suspicious. He looked through the garage window and at first thought the man had a heart attack. So he broke the window and entered, only to see the man more or less conscious in his car. At first, he had no idea what was going on, but then he noticed the distinctive smell of gasoline. He broke the door to enter the house and discovered the mess the old guy created. The neighbor immediately called the cops and a bomb squad took care of the explosives just in time. Unfortunately, the dog suffocated in the trunk and was already dead when the neighbor arrived. The authorities arrested the guy and put him into a psychiatric ward after the court process. He will remain there until the end of his life. The estimated blast radius of the bomb would have been sufficient enough to destroy several houses and do severe damage to the surrounding area. Story 9. My neighbor was living with his parents his whole life because he couldn't work due to some psychological disorder. I don't know what it was exactly, but he walks around his house all day and looks at it from all possible angles. He's watching his house or his car in the garage all day. Sometimes he is watching from inside, just staring outside absently. When you walk past him and greet him, he never answers. Doesn't even seem to notice you. Sometimes he walks around the block with his old leather suitcase and sunglasses on. He returns quickly all the time. When he recognizes something that is not right, he calls the police. Even when someone turns around the car in his driveway or parks near it. When I was a child and we had birthday parties where the parents parked their cars near his driveway to collect their children, he nearly always called the police. When I come home late at night, his front door is always open a little bit with him sitting behind and watching. Sometimes when friends are over and we go for a smoke outside at night, he comes outside and goes to his garage. He has got very bright lights installed and pretends to check his car, at night at 4 a.m. of course. It's kind of disturbing, but you get used to it from time to time. On the other hand, we never fear any burglars breaking into our house, because we know our neighbor is watching. Story 10. When I was a child, we had a neighbor named Pat. Crazy Pat, they called her. She lived in an old Victorian home that looked like it was falling apart from the outside. She'd sit on her porch and yell at people before the front porch was falling apart. Then she'd just walk up and down the sidewalk yelling at people, but then it went from harmless crazy lady to bad times for everyone. One day Pat tried to stab my neighbor Mr. S. Mr. S had to call the cops and the cops didn't do much. Then Pat tried to run Mr. S over and nothing happened. Then Pat started calling our home and just breathing loudly before hanging up or screaming things into the phone like garbage. Literally just saying the word garbage. Then the years went by and all the neighborhood kids that Pat tormented grew up. And the night before Halloween transpired. For reasons unknown, she was dumb enough to leave her home for a period of time. At which point all heck broke loose. One kid from up the street climbed onto the roof and entered her home through the second floor bedroom window. Another kid entered via the basement. Some kids rode their bikes 4 blocks over to the local grocer and bought all the eggs and toilet paper they could get. And what did the parents do? They all watched and kept a lookout. Pat came home and called the cops. The cops asked every neighbor if they saw anything. Every resident said the same thing. Silence. Pat moved away later that year. Someone bought the house on a song and renovated it and made it look quite nice. Story 11. I win. Funny story, I found out yesterday he was recently institutionalized by the state of Louisiana. A neighbor asks me over for dinner. I accept. The date does not go well for multiple reasons, and I tell him the next day I'm not interested. 2 weeks later, he leaves me a bottle of women's gummy vitamins on my doorstep. He'll text me when I walk to my car telling me I look beautiful. He left me a flower and a handwritten poem, which in one stanza states to the pretty girl with gorgeous black curls. She may want boys, but I would like girls. We put a sign on our door that said neighbor, his name. Go away. If you come back, we are calling the police. He responds by breaking into our backyard and trying to come in through the back door. After calling the police and having a trespassing order against him, he comes by to bring me a blanket because... After that, he left me a ticket to a play for seat A18. At the top, he wrote, I have seat A19, winky face. After more calls to the police, he eventually flees the state. He was picked up in Louisiana on unrelated charges, and the police had him get a psych evaluation, and now the state is holding him. This all occurred over 6-7 months. I'm leaving out a lot of the smaller super creepy stuff he did. Silver lining, I no longer bite my nails or have a fear of needles. Because needles aren't going to break into my house and murder me, am I right? Story 12. A few years ago, I moved into this fantastic apartment building in Juneau, Alaska. This place had everything: mold, mildew, and domestic violence on a daily basis. It was a really classy place. A gentleman a couple of doors down had an interesting habit of inviting younger women over to exchange favors for meth. He was always really hurt when they eventually stole his TV. That man lost more TVs than I have ever owned. He eventually got a roommate to help him pay for his place. At first, the roommate was decent. He was friendly and mostly kept to himself. I was in a bad relationship at the time, and he was all sympathetic ears. Unfortunately, he started drinking. That man would drink everything. His favorite thing was Yukon Jack with a cheap 40 chaser. At some point, he decided he was in love with me and started leaving gifts in my car. Nothing to elaborate on. Just promotional ice scrapers and things he would find in the woods. You know, normal stuff. He tried to give me a classic car at one point. I'm not sure the car was actually his to give away. The original neighbor in this story eventually went to jail, and my personal creeper moved into the apartment next door. He started working as maintenance for the building and let it be known that he had keys for every apartment. I believe he entered my home more than once, but never got any proof. My boyfriend and I were having some pretty serious problems. Creeper became my boyfriend's new best friend. They were always together. Creeper became almost like a member of the family. Creeper started to give me drunken lectures on how to be a better girlfriend. He would sit outside our window for hours at a time. I was afraid to leave the house. I finally regained my sense and moved out of that situation. I occasionally run into Creeper. He used to follow me around in public places, but has thankfully knocked that off. From what I heard, Creeper may have attempted to rape my ex-boyfriend. They no longer speak.